Dini Dixon, born 1991, Santa Barbara, California, is a Brooklyn-based ceramicist and clay animator whose work explores the weaponization of women's mental health and the search for emotional balance. A 2015 BFA graduate from Pratt Institute, Dixon embraces the unruly nature of clay to express psychological tension, emotional transparency, and bodily vulnerability. Her sculpture is often asymmetrical, cracked, and vividly glazed, celebrate imperfection while challenging traditional ideas of beauty and control in craft. Her practice is rooted in introspection, but outwardly engages with larger conventions about gender, healing, and resilience. Dixie's recent solo exhibition, Depicting Resurgence, at Varie 2023, created during a summer residency at Artshack Brooklyn, marked a pivotal moment in her evolving exploration of fragility and strength. She has also held solo exhibitions at 808 Projects Denver and Thomas Hunter Project Space Manhattan, and her video The Long Goodbye was featured at the 2018 Supernova Digital Animation Festival. In summer 2024, her ceramic works were featured in the two-person exhibition Natural Resilience at Tappeto Volante Projects, where her sculptures dialogued with themes of environmental and psychological adaptation. Dixon continues to develop her practice from her Los Angeles studio, using ceramics and animation to transform deeply personal struggles into tactile, collective reflection. Dini, thank you so much for carving out some time to join me today. I really
Of course.
am glad to.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah. I wanted to start out with I've noticed that this recurring thread in your work that feels both personal and political. Your work often addresses the weaponization of women's mental health. How did that theme first emerge in your practice?
Yeah, I think so I don't I feel like there's probably some origins that go back like pretty far with that in my work. I always have made work sort of about my family, and mental health has always kind of come up within that dialogue. But really, I think in the last 5 years, it's kind of intensified or changed direction, I would say. About 5 years ago, I got sober. And so it kind of that transition changed my work right away. I would say the way that I thought about my work and the way that I approached it. And then for me, I was in this big process of healing, and I think I wanted my work to become a part of that. Like I didn't want to feel that they were at odds in any way. So I sort of wanted to connect the feeling that my work itself was a healing process, and then it felt like the most honest thing to do to kind of share a little bit about that in the work. And I hope that in a way, by being a bit vulnerable with like what I was saying, I could kind of like maybe make someone else, like a viewer, more comfortable and feel a little less isolated if they were going through something similar. So it just feels like to me, I relate to work that's very like honest and that I connect to. I feel like when an artist is being just kind of an open book, like I connect with it more. And so I was hoping that maybe I could make that transition um, when I started talking about my own life. I think before I got sober, I was like, I don't want to talk about personal things in art. There's something about it. I wanted things to be like reflect me, but I was really guarded. So I think that when I got sober, I was like, I can't be guarded anymore, you know?
Yeah, I'm so glad that you're so open about that idea, like that personal experience, because it's prevalent in our community. I think just like being sober, I think so. I really kind of want you to, I want to make you feel like that's such a great way to kind of put things into perspective for a lot of us. I think so. Thank you for sharing that. I really appreciate it. And that's like a really important, I think, topic to kind of understand, I think. And I want to also understand how like your pieces are very playful and color plays a really important part in your, and so does like the playfulness tools of subversion in your ceramic sculpture. Can you describe that a little bit for more like?
Yeah, totally. So my experience with ceramics, it's interesting because I like didn't really want to become a ceramicist, and I was really into sculpture, and I found clay, and I found like the craft. side of the ceramics world to be a bit like um humorless and like it had this tendency towards formalism, and then a lot of that the formalism is rooted in a lot of um like history of just men in ceramics, and it had this like bravado to it and kind of like exclusive kind of feeling where it's like these people kind of created like what we view as contemporary ceramics. And it was like it felt like a pretty rigid framework to enter into. So I've always gravitated towards like women in ceramics, and I feel like there is kind of like for me, when it comes to color and when it comes to like my approach to craft, I'm always kind of trying to break the rules that I see that this sort of like contemporary ceramics history created. Um, and I just am like a bit of a rebel, you know. I grew up in like the punk rock scene in Southern California, like you know, like sort of this like belated punk rock scene that happened in the early 2000s. And so it's like I've always kind of like been drawn to things that are a bit just kind of like frenetic and intense, and like I don't want things to be like proper. And ceramics can have a lot of that. It's like, have you studied, you know, cup making for 25 years, and have you been making the same object your entire life? Well, then it's not serious or something. So I think it's kind of fun and playful for me to just kind of engage with like a lot of rule breaking when it comes to like the colors, but also the forms and the way that I make my work. I often do things that like I was very specifically told not to do in like early training in ceramics. So I guess I can't help myself, you know, like I have to kind of fuck it up a little bit.
Yeah, no, definitely. I like that like rawness that you're just like jumping in to things and just like kind of feeling it out. And if I could relate to that experience of like just like, jumping into something and then kind of like forgetting about all these parameters that you like people show you in school, and you're like, oh, you didn't even think
Totally.
about it. For after a while, you just kind of make it and do it, and if like it comes up, I think it kind of naturally kind of comes up, I think, which
Yeah.
makes it really rich. And going back to you talking about like the idea of making work that's emotional, or kind of at least brings out those ideas forward in your visual vocabulary. And I
Yeah.
want to go back to like depicting resurgence, which you kind of depict a lot of like the natural world. It sort of becomes like a metaphor to
Hmm.
things. How does that relate to environmental resilience to emotional resilience?
I think that for me, like, the mind is like a very malleable, sort of like changing place, and it has the ability to adapt and transition and kind of grow through all of these things that we don't, you know, when we're kids, like we have no way of anticipating like what kind of changes we're gonna need to adapt to in our lives. But I find that like the mind is kind of capable of so much. And I think that the forest, like to me, it feels like this visual representation of that kind of adaptability because there's a lot of tension. You can see plants like growing in strange places, or growing over another plant, or like roots on top of a rock, or like, um, you know, mushrooms kind of growing out of something that's decaying. There's like all of this sort of like life that comes from decay in the forest. And there's also like a lot of tension. Like this, you know, this is like what do you call it? Like an invasive species. And then it's like killing this other plant. There's all this like sort of tension, and yet at the same time ultimately like it's kind of thriving, and there's like always a way, like even if things are kind of a little bit fucked up, the forest kind of always finds a way to continue to grow and evolve. And so I think that's like a really beautiful sort of visual metaphor. And I also think like, you know, we're kind of like, it gives me hope because right now we're destroying the planet, and it's like we're living in this time where we have to be really aware that we have to live, but the way that we live is destroying the planet. So it's like it is sort of like you know, it's like there's this apathy and kind of there's, you know, also this feeling there's nothing that we can do about it if you don't have like all this power, but I think that there is a lot that we can do, even just by thinking about it, making work, reflecting, taking it seriously, or taking an interest in like what's happening. And when I look at the forest and when I look at like the ocean and the way that nature is adapting, I feel like I can see the future. Like post-human, like the earth is like taking itself back, reclaiming itself, and it's actually like really beautiful and it's fine. It's like fine without us. And that brings me a lot of peace because or like it helps me relax a little bit because I don't really care if like humanity continues forever, but I don't want to ruin the earth. Um, it's like, so maybe we can like just kind of envision the earth after post-human and like it's totally fine. And that helps me feel like, okay, we can't destroy the earth. It feels like we're trying to, but probably the earth will make a comeback and we won't. And like that's fine with me.
Yeah,
Like I can make peace with that.
definitely. Like the Earth coming back is a real thing. It's like like when you said that, I thought about like when I was really invested in the idea of like, oh well, what came before the Big Bang.
hmm
How they
hmm
and they're like, oh, it's called the Big Bounce, like the Big Bounce theory, where it's like the Earth kind of goes back to where it started,
hmm
and
Yeah.
then this is where like the meta, like the multiple universe kind of theories start to come in, which I don't know too well, but I think
Yeah.
it'd be really interesting. I'm
I
like,
know I've kind of like tried to look into this stuff and it's just yeah, it's awesome and it's like it's silly and it's also like it helps me. Like it's my imagination kind of goes when that door opens. You're like, okay, there's so much potential. We don't even know what is in the universe anyways.
wow,
So it's like to think about it as this like finite thing.
it's
I,
really incredible. Can you
yeah.
imagine? There's like multiple of you and I and get another. Anyhow, I wanted.
I totally believe it's possible.
Yeah, it's just. I mean, like, wow. It's incredible. But I also want to talk about, you move through other media fluently as well. I know that I took a look at some of your videos that you have I think it's on YouTube, I believe, or I might be wrong. I know it's out there somewhere. I just remind me if where exactly it is, but it's fascinating to
Oh,
see how
yeah.
your voices kind of stay consistent across the whatever media you work in. I want to know like exactly how like clay animation differs from your ceramic sculpture work and what draws you to both.
Yeah. Well, I think like I forget like what first gave me the idea to do it, honestly. But I do like the idea that it's clay. So I'm often working with stop motion and I'm working with clay. And I like the idea of like combining the two. So sometimes even in like the clay animation videos, I'll have like fired ceramic props or different elements that are like made out of ceramic clay, but I'm also using polymer clay and unfired ceramic clay so that I can move it. So it felt like it's clay. I'm into it. Anything clay, I'm into it. And I think like one thing with ceramics is there's a lot of movement in the process. It's like to me it feels it's intense like physically. It's kind of demanding. There's a lot of moving around. I walking around in circles around a table, lifting up heavy things, scraping and like wedging the clay. And there's a lot of, it's like, it can be physically kind of exhausting and there's a lot of like action in it. And that's one thing that I really love because I'm a very tactile physical person. Like I need to use my body. Um, and so I think like, that part of the process doesn't feel super visible to a viewer sometimes because you fire it and it's perfectly still and then it's on a pedestal or it's like, in this like sort of elevated view and you don't really see all of the work that went into it. But for me, it's like the energy and the sort of choreography that goes into making in the studio that's kind of what draws me in as an artist is like being able to see someone else's hand being able to kind of like identify with an artist because I can see their mark making. I can kind of like follow it like a little trail, you know. Oh, they like started here and then they added and then they layered and then they built it up. And so it's like, I wanted people to be able to kind of see my process and to kind of feel like that intensity and that energy that goes into the making process. So with animation, it's like I'm recording my steps and you can see my steps and they're happening. And then it starts to feel like a little dance and it's moving. And I felt like it kind of it held on to some of the life of the studio. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, you know what? And also it's funny, but it's like a very Pratt thing, but I read the it's an essay by Brancusi, the artist in his studio, I think it's called, and it's about how like your work is alive in the studio and it dies when it leaves because it's the act of making that is like the richness of the process is like what makes the work kind of charged and meaningful, and then it kind of dies. And so he talked about galleries being like these cemeteries for work. And I
Huh.
think that I was like, oh,
Yeah, I like
it's like
that.
it's cool, right? And then I was kind of like I felt like I identified with that. So I was like, how do I bring my process into the gallery and like show more of it if I can't have it be like made in the gallery? I want to show the process.
Yeah, I remember, when we were at Pratt, like you had guys had like, or you had a social practice kind of like come in your gallery, kind of like touch the clay, make it.
Yeah.
I thought that was like so innovative at the time. I was like, wow, it's like incredible. And I was like, I never thought about it in that perspective. So I like that you kind of brought sort of life to this kind of like box.
Yeah, Masse Ferrer and I did that together. That was like so fun.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
remember it. I was like, oh wow, it's so
Yeah.
neat. And I think I want to go back to what you said about you talked about how Brancusi talks about it as well, but these imperfections that kind of you embrace in your work and these flaws, I guess, what some people might call flaws, how do they kind of like how do you attach personally and artistically to that vocabulary? What do you kind of like? What's your train of thought with that?
Yeah, so I mean, I like I said, I kind of like breaking the rules and I really like to kind of make the breaking the rules its own craft, if that makes sense. Because I guess I see these like perfect ceramic objects that are kind of like viewed as like really well made. And I feel like they're kind of hiding the material. Like to me, I don't see the material, the texture, and the process. Clay does crack a lot, you know, and it's like really beautiful. Cracks are really beautiful. And so like these idealized ceramics or the ceramics that we often are familiar with are like kind of air quotes flawless, and that's what we're attracted to about them. So I kind of like to create things that show the material, really demonstrate like the texture and the tension that's in the material. It can be difficult to work with, and um, because of that, I feel like it can be like really freeing to kind of allow that to speak for itself versus to kind of like disguise the difficulty in working with clay, but to kind of show it. So um yeah, it feels just kind of a little bit liberating. And I guess like to me, it kind of connects to this idea of craft for me. But you have another question about that, so I can kind of like come around to that too. But I just think that basically like craft can be anything that you work on repetitively. So if I continuously work on these cracks, then that becomes my craft. So it may not be traditional craft, but it's something that I'm honing over time. And so it's like I can kind of perfect it to myself. It's like just anything that an artist does over and over and over again. It's like it becomes their own language. So I think that that's kind of what I'm developing. I'm trying to have my own language, but not use the traditional words that are maybe referenced in ceramic practice.
Yeah, and I wanted to go back to like the idea of again, for like a third time or whatnot, but the idea of like this kind of exhibiting like showing these what I call imperfections, which are probably the wrong term, but for just for the sake of just like getting the idea out, like the idea of describing like the reality, and I think
Yeah.
it's a good way to kind of bring that visual language as a metaphor to how life can also be sort of fluid, like it could move in different ways. And I'm just saying that as a way to kind of describe how life can be very sort of not what's the word I'm looking for? Like very kind of like you unexpected, like the things that sort of just kind of happen and fall. I think it's a really good way to kind of talk about that, like that visual language. And
Yes, and like life, death is part of life, and so kind of celebrating like growth and decay with an even hand. It kind of like to me showing clay that has these kind of like um these marks of tension and problems and like it does feel reflective of life as it is, you know?
yeah, and there's something about like the idea of consciousness, like when you
Yeah.
see the touch and how things are built and not instead of hiding, like you're saying, like instead of hiding that I'm not a Luddite or anything like that, but you like to kind of like sit back and sort of
As
like
we talk on Zoom.
yeah, it's like as back, but as like sit back and sort of kind of reclaim that sort of I don't know consciousness. Like when you step outside of like the screen, like there's like some sort of kind of really interesting dynamic between the new normal and what we kind of this is when we disassociate with our this like simulations, right? And I
Yeah.
want to know kind of also too like how you build on these narratives and these symbols. Like, do you see your work kind of consistently sort of touching upon like symbols, or how does
Yeah.
that work in your visual diagram?
So I feel like for me, like what I do, I actually am like super nerdy about Celtic mythology and folk tales. Like I'm really into kind of like referencing like my own personal sort of like lineage in folk tale and like poetry and stuff like that from Ireland and Wales. And I just so I will say like I'm really interested in stories and storytelling. And I feel like what I do is I take my own experiences and I kind of translate them into what feels like a myth for myself. Like, and then I make an object that reflects that visually. But I feel like what happens is I tell a story and then I present it to a viewer and then I try to give like pretty poetic explanation, like not too much detail because I want people to have their own experience with the work. And I think often what happens is people will totally interpret it differently than I anticipate. Like it's not misinterpretation, but it's sorry, I have a kitten here.
Oh,
Um,
well, hmm.
we found her in a tree
Well,
the
it's
other day.
black. Oh,
But it's kind of like, air quotes, it's being misinterpreted, right? But it's actually just the viewers having their own experience. And I think that that's more personal to them than telling them my experience. Like they might have a connection to my work that I couldn't ever present to them.
uh,
Okay, I'm sorry.
oh,
And I think that's probably more special, right? Like I think it's probably a richer experience for a viewer to be able to like connect it to their own life than it is to understand my life. And so I'm really here for it. Like I'm like, please misinterpret it, you know?
yeah.
Interpret it your own way. It's not misinterpretation. And so I try not to give too much detail into those myths for the most part, but
Yeah.
um
And
it's symbolic too. Like there's lots of use of symbols. So it's like
I was gonna say it also brings insight into your work as well. Like when people misinterpret it or interpret it in their own personal way, I think it kind of, at least I've noticed that like sometimes when I don't know, like somebody kind of sees something and then like has a totally different perspective on that than I did. I'm really kind of taken back because I'm like, oh wow, you saw that, and that's not quite what I
right.
saw, but it's so interesting to kind of fill in the gap. of those of those.
Yeah, it circles back to the like multiple realities thing, because it's like my reality and your reality are very different. It's all subjective. Where our experiences are our world. So in our perspective. So it's kind of like it's fun to play with it. And you're like hinting at
Yeah,
certain things and using certain symbols, which, if you go back to like a Freudian perspective, they would like trigger certain thoughts for certain people or something. But I know that it's just not quite that direct, It's like I might have this association with this symbol and another person has a different association, and it's fun to play with it, but visual communication is abstract. I think that's the very nature of it, which is like draws me, I'm not a very like literary person. I do try. But like, I'm a visual person, so it's like it's okay that there's loose ends to me.
yeah. No, and I think growing up, I think I always understood the world to be away from me. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, always to be this. I've always like, there's always something in between the world and I. And that's how I saw it when I was growing up. But then later on, I realized that I'm in the world, and I guess that's going back to the psychological kind of space. I want to know what kind of
Mm.
space do you think your viewers are in when they're looking at your work, or like, for example, like the videos that you're creating? How do you think that people tap into that?
Well, again, like I feel like I almost don't want to think about it too much. Like when I start thinking about the viewer's experience, I think what happens sometimes is I get like self-conscious about my work. So I want to almost like think about my own experience and then kind of like let that be whatever happens, happens. I think like people tell me things sometimes about my work, like it feels like it has I think like people tend to, oh, sorry, kittens climbing on the chair. I think people tend to think of it as like there's a like a spiritual element. A lot of the times what I hear from people is that they're kind of like they view my work as kind of altar-like or like having like a very like deeply spiritual kind of perspective. And I think that it does feel like a prayer or an offering to me. So it's cool that that part registers. Other than that, like I don't really like put myself in the shoes of the viewer. I kind of almost systematically try to avoid doing that because then I would be like thinking about myself. It's like thinking about what I look like. It's like I don't want to do that. I just want to be me. You
Yeah.
know what I mean?
Yes, I think I know what you mean exactly.
If you look in the mirror too much, like you're gonna start seeing problems. So it's like that's like if I think about what the viewer thinks of the work, I'm gonna be taken out of the process of making the work.
And going back to this multiple universe thing, like yes, I think it was yesterday. I went, I like to go for my usual routine run or whatnot, and I
Yeah.
started thinking about, for some reason, I started thinking about this. Like when you look at the mirror, you see yourself, but then when you're thinking about ideas or things like that, it's another way to sort of understand yourself. So there's multiple identities that kind of we start to embody. I think at least that's
Yeah.
how I came to that conclusion of it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Um,
Totally.
yeah, it's really interesting. But I want to know like the how you navigate those that like the line between formal craft training and maybe intuition and experimental making.
Okay. So it's like kind of funny because we both went to Pratt. It's like such a part of our education. Um, I think for me, like the the idea of a craftsperson, it's like I love the idea of that type of lifestyle as kind of proletariat or like worker oriented. So it's sort of like um it kind of goes back to this like idea of like the Bauhaus training at Pratt. Like I signed up to go to Pratt because I wanted to be formally trained. But then when I got there, I felt like that wasn't actually really what was happening, in my opinion. Like the Bauhaus training, like that element of Pratt, it was there, and it also wasn't totally as pure as I had envisioned it from my um city college classroom, like kind of imagining what this like amazing institution would be like. It's not that it was totally um like not true, but I think that there is like a part of it that it felt like a legacy, and then when you get there, it's maybe not as present.
Mm.
But I will say that like I love the idea of this like worker crafts person, and that is kind of like the Bauhaus concept. It's like we're a part of society, we're just like mechanics, but we do art. And it's like it's an important vital part of society, and therefore we're just average workers. And I like love that kind of like dream and vision for an artist versus like, something like in the salon in Paris, like, just being an intellectual or something. Um,
Yeah, I see what you see.
then
No,
it's like,
mhm.
yeah, go ahead, go ahead.
No, I think that idea of like coming into this sort of narrative that precedes you, like this, like, oh, you can just kind of coming into this timeline that people have
Yeah,
already sort of have this preconceived notion of what it's like, and then like being really into the whole nitty-gritty. I think it was a really kind of I think important moment I think for a lot of people just like to realize that I don't know how many people come in with that perspective, but I know that in like going there was totally different from what I thought it would be as well, like
totally.
many different ways. Like I thought it was like much more kind of for some reason I thought it was the opposite. Like I thought it was like more conceptually kind of like based where I was like, oh, we're talking
Oh, yeah,
and it was like more like talking and critiques and things like that. But I feel like it, for some reason that took on precedence. Like that was like the most important part of like the whole teaching, whereas like being in your studio was more of a solitary kind of like
totally.
experience. Like when I was in painting, because I did painting, so it was like, oh, we'll go in our studio, we'll be alone most of the time, and
Right,
you will go and sort of sit with professors and kind of talk about like all these like whatever. Like they would give you like papers to read, and it was like multiple pages, and you would read
right, right.
and it was like very heavily kind of like and I was like mind you I was like oh my God I don't know what's going on and it was I kind of struggled with that at the time and I was like oh wow I think it just kind of like hit me in the head like I don't know later on I was like okay but
Yeah, totally. But I do think like in a way making things it's like a simple life. It's like a beautiful simple life. So for craft, I feel like my association is just that it's like a simple life that to me gives me a lot of it gives it's not that it's tranquil, but it gives me purpose to be making something and to be engaged in the act of making something constantly. Um, it's like very spiritually grounding. And I think that if you work on something continuously, it's just like a spiritual practice or a meditation practice, which is something that I personally feel like I really need.
mm,
So in a way, I view craft as more of a lifestyle, and
okay
and then like the actual craft itself is anything that develops out of that commitment to this kind of a lifestyle. Whatever aesthetics or style or skills that come are like born from that, I think that becomes your craft. So
mm,
it's like craft is a lifestyle, and it's also like the result of that sort of experience, that lived experience.
yeah
Less than like certain like this type of painting or this type of ceramics or this technique. It's not technique based to me. It's much more rooted in like the act of being present with your work on a daily basis, thinking like an artist, looking at the world as an artist, stuff like that.
yeah like it's more kind of intertwined with like your how you kind of go about your everyday life like you just like I think that's all how things are sort of changing. It seems like things are just kind of like becoming that because for a long time I felt like I was very separate from my work, but then later on I was like, oh wow, like my work is kind of developing in a way where I can actually kind of bring in aspects of my life and kind of meld it together with
More personal, yeah.
yeah, with like the actual, see, like the craft itself, like meaning like the way that I kind of draw or the mark making, I think really, I was like, oh wow, the mark making is actually kind of like saying something about what I'm doing. And I feel like that is when I
Yeah.
think about craft, that's usually what in that context. But
Totally.
yeah, I think we've come to the end of our talk, and I would like to thank you so much for being here. Really appreciate it, Dini.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, thanks so much for having me. And yeah, I do. I love the work that you're doing now. I'm really happy I got to take a look at that.
Thank you. Yes, and
Yeah.
you are in California. I do want to make sure that I know I said.
Yeah, so I need to update my bio because I'm in California at the moment, and I'm gonna be here for a long time. I think I like it here, and I'm opening a ceramic studio here. So
Yeah, what's it called? Name?
it's called Nick's Ceramic Studio, and I'm opening it with my best friend Vanessa Deanda. So we're hoping it opens this month, but we're in the middle of the permit process. But
Awesome. Well, good luck with that.
yeah,
I'm excited. And if I visit,
yeah,
I'll make sure to stop by.
yeah. Please come visit, please. It'd be awesome.